Hey, it's Connor here from the hit documentary Spanish in a Month. And if you're looking to learn Spanish fast, whether it's for work, friends and family, travel, or even love, this video is for you. Now, I'm going to break down everything that I know about learning Spanish fast and really boil it down to a couple concepts for you in this short video. So let's get started. So let's start with the foundational law of language learning. And if there's anything that really boils down everything I know into one simple concept, it's this. Basically states that there are two things that you need to focus on to learn any language. The first thing is learning the stuff of the language. You know, the grammar, the vocab, the pronunciation, the things you think of when you think of learning a language. But the second part is actually using all that stuff in lots of real conversations so it becomes second nature. This is the part that everyone forgets about. It's why things like software Rosetta Stone, Duolingo don't work. It's why tapes don't work. It's why traditional classes don't work, because you're not getting in that speaking time. That's also why immersion is so powerful. That's why, ask anyone what's the fastest way to learn a language, they could tell you immersion, right? But immersion by itself doesn't solve it, because there's plenty of people who've been living here in Medellin, Colombia for 5 years and can barely speak anything. So you need both parts of it. Now these are an ongoing process. One feeds in the other. So it's not do this and then do that. It's sort of like learn a thing and then use it to solidify it. Okay, now I've got that strong. Okay, learn another thing, make the ball a little bit bigger, and then solidify it. So at any time, the blue part of this graphic is the stuff that you know, and orange is the stuff that you've added. And as soon as you get that part of orange, you use it a lot, that solidifies it, and now that part is also blue. And then you learn new stuff, and then you solidify that stuff through conversation. It's an ongoing process. That's why if I say, ¿Cómo estás?, you're not like, oh, what does that mean? You just know. So the goal is to get everything to that point, and it's a process of learning a new thing, using it in conversations. Learning a new thing, using it in conversations. It's an ongoing process. The second thing is what you learn is actually more important than how you learn it. The famous author Tim Ferriss has got a really great story. He was in Japan for high school for an intercambio, an exchange, and everything was in Japanese. And he was really struggling with everything. He was studying Japanese a lot and everything was in Japanese, but he was still having a really hard time. And then he found a textbook of the 1,000 most common words in Japanese. And he memorized those 1,000 words, and it seemingly overnight, he just got everything. So what you decide to learn is actually extremely important, because if you learn the right stuff, the most important, most frequently used stuff, you actually don't need to learn that much Spanish in order to become conversational. So what should you actually study? The first thing is you want to get a base of the most important grammar, most used things, so you can actually form coherent sentences and communicate. But there's really not that much grammar, and you can use hacks to avoid learning certain things, like the future tense, for instance. There's a hack to avoid learning that completely. And you want to learn the most common 1,000 words, more or less. This will give you a really strong base to communicate. But after that, I would recommend just learning the vocabulary specific to your particular interests, because you're going to spend a lot of time speaking about the things that you personally care about. So they're in your top 1,000. So that's pretty much it. You want that base of grammar and the most common 1,000 words that everyone uses. That's your base. And then you just add whatever you care about learning, whether that's business or medicine or psychology, or whatever you're interested in. Now, speaking of this vocabulary, the fastest way to learn vocab is with flashcards, but not just flashcards, but smart flashcards on SRS, or spaced repetition system. They're basically flashcards that if you get it right, you'll see it in 4 hours, and then you'll see it in a day, and then you'll see it in 4 days, and then you'll see it in 2 weeks, and then 2 months, and so on. But if you get it wrong, you see it more often. Now, these intervals are specifically designed based on neuroscience research into memory. So it asks you for that card just before you were about to forget it. So this is an extremely powerful way. You load everything into this. It's an extremely powerful way of memorizing large amounts of vocabulary all at once. But people make a big mistake when it comes to flashcards, and that's that they lean on them too much. They depend on them too much. The only job of a flashcard, the only job, is to get the word to the point where if you're in a conversation, you can remember the word. Even if it takes you a few seconds, like you're in the middle of a sentence, you're searching, how do I say water again? Agua. Boom, done. The flashcard has done its job. If you can remember it in a real conversation, the flashcard has done its job. Because ultimately, if you want to not ever have to think about the word, you have to use it. It goes back to that foundational law I spoke about earlier. You've got to learn the thing and then actually use it. Otherwise, if you stop using the flashcards, you're going to forget all of the words. I haven't used flashcards in over 1.5 years for Spanish, and I still haven't forgotten anything that's in the flashcards because it's stuck in here, because I've actually used it. So the flashcard is just to get it in your head and get a lot of words in your head very quickly, but you've got to actually use them if you want to really stick. The next thing is you really want to learn pronunciation first, or at least get a strong base in the sounds of Spanish early on. Reality is focusing on your pronunciation is not only going to help you be understood, which is what I initially thought it would do when I focused on pronunciation, but it actually really helps you understand other people. Because instead of, expecting to hear, something incorrectly, you're waiting for bastante, for instance, instead of bastante, you're going to not understand someone when they speak to you. So by studying pronunciation, you're not only going to have a better accent yourself, but you're going to understand people when they speak to you, and it provides a really good base so you're not memorizing vocabulary incorrectly, and people actually think that your level of Spanish is better than it is. Speaking of understanding people when they speak fast, that's the #1 thing people ask me about. So there are 2 things that really go into this, and the typical prescription is just do more listening practice, but that really doesn't solve the problem. If you can't understand someone when they speak fast to you, but you can understand them kind of when they're speaking slower, it's one of these 2 issues. One is you don't have the sounds down. So go back to that last step, focus on your pronunciation, take our free Sounds of Spanish course, really get those sounds down. But if you've already got that down, it's because you're translating. Because even if you know everything, if you're translating in your head, you're not going to be able to keep up. No matter how good you are, your brain having to translate means that you're going to get left behind. So if you want to understand people when they speak fast, you can't have to translate. Now, there's nothing wrong with translating. I am not in the camp of language learners who are like, oh, you must use photos for everything and there can be no English. Absolutely not. I think that's a total load of crap, frankly. We all translate. It helps us, understand different concepts. The problem is continuing to translate later down the road. In the beginning, you're going to translate something. But after you've used it a lot, you've solidified that thing. Back to our example of ¿Cómo estás? You don't have to translate that in your head. You just understand it. Same thing with hola or gracias. So it's back to that, orange and blue graphic from before, is you're constantly expanding the amount of stuff that you don't have to translate because you've used it in conversations, you've solidified it, and now you can say it without having to think about it. And if you can say it without having to think about it, when someone else says it to you, you'll be able to understand them, even if they're speaking 1,000,000 miles an hour. So that's the big one, is having to translate. And guys, you always need to translate. I still have to translate some things, but what I have to translate now is not what I had to translate 6 months ago. As your Spanish gets better and better and better, you're constantly solidifying this stuff. And eventually, when that base of stuff that you don't have to translate is big enough, you're going to understand someone when they speak fast to you. And now for the #1 mistake I see any language learner make, especially in Spanish, and it's worrying about being perfect. In the beginning, you're going to speak Tarzan Spanish. I today to eat. That's fine. In fact, that's good. You've got to be willing to make mistakes because you really need that speaking practice. And in the beginning, making mistakes is inevitable if you open your mouth and speak. So you can't be afraid of that. Later on, you can weed out these errors, but you're really not going to build muscle memory or habits with this bad grammar, so to speak, like most people think you will. If you do it for 2 years, yeah, you could build some bad habits. But in the short term, you really don't need to worry about it. So focus on communicating, not focusing on perfection. So it's really quite simple. To learn Spanish fast, you need to focus on the right grammar and most used vocab, have a ton of conversations, nail the sounds of the language early on, use flashcards to memorize the vocab up front, and not be afraid of making mistakes. But what's the right grammar? Who are you going to have those conversations with? Who's going to check your pronunciation? Who's going to give you that controlled environment where you can make those extremely embarrassing mistakes without fear? let's be straight. You need a teacher. And not just any teacher, but one that actually follows all of these principles I've been speaking about. But it's really expensive, or it was until we created BaseLang. At BaseLang, you can get unlimited one-on-one Spanish tutoring for $129 a month. It's really unlimited, no caveats. Hours are from 6 a.m. to midnight Eastern Time, and you've got over 100 teachers to work with. The curriculum is optimized for becoming conversational fast. In fact, it's an updated version of what I used for the Spanish in a Month documentary. Your first week is just $1, and then it's $129 a month after that for unlimited classes. If at any point in the first 35 days you don't absolutely love BaseLang, we'll not only give you a full refund, but an extra $20 for wasting your time. So if you're serious about learning Spanish this year, click the link in the description or click the link on this video and get started right now.